Hi, this is Jamie Anderson with Excelsior Classes. I teach an introduction to journalism and podcasting class. And today we have a guest speaker, Mr. Jeff Gould. He is a storyteller who has started his own business to tell stories because he has collected a lot of stories over the years. He graduated from the University of Minnesota back in 1984, I believe. Jeff, I think you might have been on campus when my husband was there.
Yes, I know him. I knew a younger version of him anyway.
Right. He probably knows a younger version of you.
Mm-hmm. Don't show him this picture. Right.
Okay, I won't. And for those of you watching, Jeff and I actually worked for the same radio network way back in the 1980s in Minnesota. Jeff was there first and he went on to bigger and better things. And then I had to try to fill his shoes.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought I came in after you. Anyway.
I can't remember which one of us came first. One of us had to fill the other's shoes. Good to have you here, Jeff. He does have a podcast, which is why I invited him here, called I Like That Story. And that's his whole business, is telling stories. So for those of you watching, I encourage you to be informed, entertained, and enlightened through Jeff's stories on I Like That Story podcast. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and just have Jeff talk to you about how he actually got into podcasting, which is relatively new, like over the last 10 years. So Jeff.
Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about my history, and it's not about me necessarily, but if you're listening now, it's really about you, because when I was your age, I did not know what I wanted to do with my life, and that was bothering to me. I remember my mom had a t-shirt that I had her make for me that said, I don't know, because I was tired of people bothering me about asking what I wanted to do. And so I see there's a lot of pressure. I remember that. What am I supposed to do with my life? Where's my purpose come from? And if you're really searching for that, part of this topic is for you. And then I'll roll down eventually to where we'll talk about, about podcasting and journalism and those kinds of things. Okay. So that is primarily the first part of the topic is how in the world do you know what you want to do? Well, probably what you'll do is you'll start out doing the things you're best at. So if you're good at journalism, if you're good at writing, if you like reading, you might find yourself going down that path. Same for math or something like that. Well, as you go through in life, you'll find that it kind of steers you in different directions. I was good at writing. I was good at reading. So when I was in college, I was a speech communications major. There is no such thing as a speech communicator. It was just a degree I could get. I could get it in 4 years. And then I decided that I would just get into radio because they would guarantee I could get a job. So what did that mean? It meant that I made less than a minimum wage for quite a period of time. It was a time of hardship, and that was okay. Sometimes people want to steer you into some place that's safe. Your parents will say, well, do something that's safe, and maybe you'll want to maybe stay at home and live in the basement because that would be safe. But if you were to look at the first part of Romans 5, 1-5, if memory serves me right, that's not necessarily what your life plan is, right? Suffering leads to perseverance. And perseverance means to be able to stand under pressure. And that leads to character. And that leads to hope. So there's a reason why the military makes you go through boot camp. It's not just to get you in shape. When you think about it, most of the weapons we use don't require physical fitness. They want you to suffer so you can prove to yourself that you can do it. Life is its own version of boot camp. God has designed life to have a little element of suffering so that eventually you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I did it. I made it. My daughters call it adulting. It's just life.
Right.
Life is hard, and it's supposed to be hard so that from that you can persevere, and that gives you character, and that gives you hope, and hope does not disappoint. So obviously your first job in the world will be the job that nobody else wants. That's why they're offering it to new people. So it's going to be the crummy job. Everybody goes through this. Do not be fooled by social media or Instagram posts or TikToks. You must suffer. And that's not a bad thing. Okay, so I suffered in radio, and
Right?
then I
As
got into
many of us did.
right. And that meant that I couldn't feed my family. So I got into sales, which I also suffered at because I didn't know how to do that. I decided that I would learn as I went. And then I became a manager for a group of funeral homes. And then at those funeral homes, I was asked to be an officiant or a celebrant at these people's funerals. And then I would hear these stories that were so interesting to me that I decided that that would be, my life calling. I decided that the thing I did better than anything else was tell stories, which is a very unusual thing. It's not really a job. I had to make that work. But fortunately, I had been taught sales. And so I knew how to do it. All as I looked backwards, it all started to make sense.
Right. Like
Now,
God was leading your life, Jeff, and you just
that's
had
right.
to take one step forward at a time.
I remember walking to work. I'd just been told by a radio station that I sucked and I should get out of the business. And I remember being so angry and bitter. And I realized that nobody was going to hire an angry and bitter person. So on the way to work, I said, God, you are now in charge of my career. I remember a couple of things. I was very defined, just the career. Such was my faith at that time. But that's when I was led down a different path. So like Moses, he was like 40, I think, when he was called. Abraham was 75. Jesus didn't start his ministry till he was 30. Give yourself a break. Allow God to just kind of walk you through life a little bit before he shows and gives you purpose. That's perfectly fine.
That's
So
wonderful. That's wonderful advice for these students, Jeff. Thank you.
I'll just tell you a quick story. So I met with a family yesterday. This guy, I'm doing the funeral tomorrow. Okay. That means I have to describe his life for people who are there. And in the room, I met with his wife and his mother. He died at the age of 43. He has a 19 and a 20-year-old son and daughter, neither of which came. Now, so ask yourself the question, where's the story there? I mean, your dad dies and you're not even going to be there when they talk about his funeral? Now, the daughter lived in a neighboring state. The son couldn't get off work. Where's the story there? And I tell that story to a 43-year-old dad. I can't help this person who died, but my goodness gracious, if you think that your kids aren't going to be there on the day after you die, that's something you got to fix. And on the other, and if you think that you don't have that kind of relationship with your mother or father, that's something that also needs to be addressed, right? And these are the kinds of stories I tell. So when we talk about journalism, which is nothing more than storytelling, we're either telling facts from an event or we're telling an opinion page. It's all the same thing. It's stories. Are you going to write for a news gathering organization? Are you going to write for a company or a website? I mean, you can pick any industry, and any industry is looking for somebody who is good with the English language to talk about whatever they want to teach, right? So Jamie and I have a history in agriculture. So there's all kinds of agribusinesses that want to teach that to the average consumer, but the person that they have that works there, they don't want to do it because they don't speak well. They're uncomfortable in front of the camera. They're uncomfortable in front of the microphone, or they're no good at grammar in the English language. And if you think that that's you, well, that's another thing. And that could be anything. It could be cars, it could be cooking, that's private industry, and they are paying money. If you are going to provide content like a radio station or TV station or newspaper, those are diminishing. Not as many people are paying. The number of radio reporters is quite a bit smaller. Newspapers quite a bit smaller. There still is a need for that information, but how are you going to get paid for providing that information? It used to be the guy down the hall sold advertising, and that money went to the boss, and then the boss divvied that out to you in the journalism department. That's not around anymore. So now you must use other methods. And of course, you're familiar with YouTube videos, and people subscribe. But now, as a content provider and as a content consumer, who is making sure that your content is real or made up? And that's kind of the challenge in the world we have today. Because if I do a video and 2 million people watch it and none of it's true, do I really care? Because I got 2 million people to watch my video and I got paid good money. And that's something very important for you as a consumer. Just because the person sounds good and is famous and has 40 million or 20 million or 2 million subscribers does not mean that what they're telling is the truth.
Right. And we've talked about that in our class. So Jeff, specifically, how did you get into producing a podcast? And that's been around since 2017, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I would say is that why would you do a podcast? I mean, if everybody has one, what in the world do I have to say? There's some sort of scripture that if I didn't say anything, even the rocks would cry out. Christ said something like that. I just learned so many things at these funerals. My wife got tired of me telling it, so I just needed to tell it to somebody. And I did it. Of course, when you do a podcast, it can be as long as you want. It can be in a studio. You can have 4 or 5 microphones. You can do anything you want. That's part of the hard thing about doing a podcast. I decided I would do something short. It would be a story. It would be about 5 minutes. It would be just me talking, and it would be some sort of takeaway or bit of advice or uplifting sort of something that I would release once a week. And I did that because I thought that discipline of providing it once a week would force me to write and create content, which I, then turn into books.
Yeah. Yeah. So your podcast is part of your business, and your business involves selling books. It involves stage presentations, recorded presentations. Okay. Right. Okay. So we're getting close to the end. Students, do you have any questions for Mr. Gould on podcasting at all, or how he does it? I really like the way that you defined what you wanted to do. It's going to be about 5 minutes. It's going to be weekly. It's going to be uplifting. It's going to be
and I rolled through that. Boy, did that take me a long time to figure out. Right? Because at first I thought I'm going to do an hour-long podcast and I'm going to have guests come in. And turns out that guests are hard to set up, and it's hard to get the 2 microphones, and they don't show up when they say they're going to show up, and they wander off the topic, and they can't tell the story as good as I can. So I had to start all over again. And then, who am I doing this for? There is a man who does a podcast who just repairs water towers. And it's the Water Tower Repair Podcast. Well, nobody wants to watch that podcast except everybody who repairs water towers. So he's got a very small audience of very loyal viewers because he's talking about what's important to them. And in a similar way, as a student, there's a podcast that you could do just for students. And now, because you've created a smaller niche, they have become more interested because it directly affects them.
Yeah, that's what we've talked about, is that they have to think about their audience. And even though they're going to talk about something that is interesting to them, it has to be interesting to the audience. And so they're actually getting ready to produce their podcast, and it's going to be about 5 minutes in length. And they can do an interview and chop it up, like a news, a radio news piece that we used to do, those longer pieces. So it might be that. Or it might be something that they write. But I think you also have some tips for them on reading scripts, right, Jeff?
So if I was a news reporter, I could read a teleprompter and maybe people would see comfort in that I'm reading a story and this guy is obviously reading this story. But if I'm telling you a story and I'm reading it off a piece of paper, you've heard radio commercials like this. You've heard commercials. It's not believable because it's not that guy's words. He or she is just reading what somebody else wrote. So if it's an opinion-based piece or an entertainment piece, then please don't write it out. Just tell the story, right? I mean, if your story is interesting, just tell the story. I mean, you got into a near fender bender on the way home. Don't write it out. Just say what happened. And it's a podcast. So if you don't like the way it is, do it again. I gave a presentation called America's Story to a group of people of disabled veterans. And I gave it last week and it was 45 minutes. And I practiced that. I went through that 50 times just by myself in a room until I felt comfortable and didn't feel like I was reading off a piece of paper, right?
Very good. Yeah. And that is what your podcasts are. I like that podcast is Jeff's podcast. And so I encourage you to go and listen to some more of his podcast. The one that we listened to several weeks ago in class was the Civil War letters that you had done. I don't know.
So
years ago.
the I Like That Story podcast, here's a mistake. It's for everybody. That's not a very tight niche. So I'm realizing, in all honesty, I have about 15,000 people a year listen to my podcast. That is an amount of people, but it's not a huge amount of people. Nobody's getting rich on that, right? If I were to sell that, I would sell that for $18 per thousand, not nearly enough money. So what I decided to do this last year is just simply talk to people who are approximately between the age of 45 and 55, because just like you are looking about what you're going to do with your life, they also are wondering what they're going to do with their life. So I am narrowing my focus to a tighter group of people, thinking that even though I'm talking to less, they might be more interested. So I'm evolving just like everybody else is.
That's wonderful. Good advice as these students go forward in doing their podcast for this class, making sure that they know who their audience is and speaking to them. So, all right. Thank you for coming to class. Any questions that anybody has? I know we've gone a little bit over. I said it would just be 15 minutes. Anybody have any questions? Okay, so Ethan has a question. What is your favorite story? Though I'm not sure we have time for that. Oh, he wants to hear a story. Do you want to tell one, Jeff?
Okay, I'll tell you a very quick story. When I was a lifeguard, approximately your age, they taught us that you should never save somebody who was drowning. They said that it was reach, throw, row, and go. Never get into the water, they would say. You'd always reach to try to save them, or you'd try to throw something. Only at the last possible would you ever try to swim after them. And the question was why? And it says, because they'll kill you. When somebody is drowning, they are so freakishly strong that they will kill you. And then they would show us pictures of people at the bottom of the lake. They're called double drownings. They're very common, or common enough, and they're both hugging each other. And what happened is that usually the loved one tries to save that person, and then both of them drown. Now, listen to this, because this is why it's my favorite story. It's my most powerful story. There's all kinds of ways that people close to you drown. And you have to be very careful how you engage with them, or they will drown you too. There's addictions, there's issues, and be careful, because sometimes your love will endanger both of you.
Oh, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I
All
can
right.
see why that one is powerful.
Okay.
Good,
All right.
good metaphor.
All right. Well, you take care now.
All
God
right.
bless. God
Thank
bless
you.
you guys. Take care now. See you.
Thank you, Jeff. All right. And thank you for watching this special interview with Jeff Gould here on Excelsior Classes.